Okay, we are live, I believe, everyone. Happy Friday. My name is Jennifer West, and I am the artistic director of Muse West Concerts. And it is my pleasure to be joined today by Ariel Carrabré and Patrick Carrabré. And yes, they have the same last name, and yes, they are related. We're going to get into that soon. I am very happy today to be coming to you from a glorious spring day on the occupied territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. At Muse West Concerts, we acknowledge that classical music presentations have a long way to go in decolonizing their work in Canada, and that we are taking steps toward that. So I would like to introduce my guests today. They are cellist Ariel Carrabré and composer Patrick Carrabré. Ariel, where are you joining us from today?
In my apartment in Montreal.
My favorite Canadian city. And Patrick, where are you today?
Yeah, I'm in my office out at UBC on Musqueam land.
Thank you. All right, we're going to start with a quick lightning round of questions just to get to know our guests a bit better. My first question is, who is your favorite symphonic composer? Ariel, you'll go first.
Um, it's a tough one, but I was always a big Shostakovich fan, so I'll go with Shostakovich.
I don't think I can answer that question. I mean, it's too hard. I'm a longtime symphonic listener, and I think it would just be really hard to. Oh man, what would I say? I would say my friend Randolph Peters.
A great choice. Wonderful. And after a concert, what is your favorite beverage of choice?
I do like beer, so I'll go with beer.
I'd have to go with a single malt scotch.
Okay, so that is planned for Thursday, May 9th. Right on. And for our listeners just joining us, we're going to have a world premiere of a cello sonata written by Pat for his son, Ariel, on Thursday, May 9th. And this is a co-production, that's coproduction in French, with the Centre Culturel Francophone de Vancouver. And we are really looking forward to that. And you can get tickets to that at musewest.org. So let's jump into this about the cello sonata. Pat, what's the title of this sonata? And can you tell us about the significance of that title?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I decided to call it Red River, and Red River is my home territory or our home territory. Ariel was born in Winnipeg. I was born in Winnipeg. We were born in the same hospital in Winnipeg, not under the same circumstances at all, because I'm a 60 scoop survivor, so I was taken from my mom at that hospital and given to my other mom at that hospital. So for me, the home territory actually has a lot of significance, particularly as someone who grew up in my early years not really knowing much about my identity. So, I mean, what can you claim as a person who doesn't know who your family is at that point in time? I loved my adopted parents and was really lucky that they're great people, but I couldn't claim their culture. So I could claim the land that I was on. So, and the Red River is a pretty important part of that land. I went across that river almost on a daily basis when I was young, living in that territory, because we lived on one side of the river and most of the musical and cultural activities take place on the other side of the river. So I would go across it. So for me, it's also one of those things. When I was young, the Red River was a mighty force to be reckoned with, because it flooded on a pretty regular basis, and it flooded like it's a serious flood. I remember one year flying over, and literally it was only water. You could only see water. And I mean, I wrote a piece a few years ago called 100,000 Lakes. And in the post-glacial period, Winnipeg was, 100 meters underwater. All of Manitoba was basically underwater. So as the Red River is the only thing left of that, but because it's so flat, it floods so easily. And I remember meeting Leonard Bernstein, and he said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from Winnipeg." He said, "I remember the flood of 50, whatever the heck it was. I was in Winnipeg. I was on a train going to wherever he was going, and we all got out and we could just see water forever, So it's a pretty fearsome kind of thing to live with that. And so the Métis people and everybody living in the Northwest had to deal with the floods. So Red River is the first movement, and then I have two other movements. One is called The Shield, because I also grew up, my family had a cottage out in the Canadian Shield country, so the Winnipeg River is out there, but I grew up walking around the Shield country. And then the other part is I called Windows on the Prairie. So it's just really thinking about, particularly, we lived in Brandon for many years, and I would drive the prairie from Winnipeg to Brandon 3 times a week sometimes. And so a lot of my creative life was thinking during that 2.5-hour drive out onto the flat of the prairie, beautiful horizons, and all of the things that you think about. And as I became more aware of my Métis heritage, you think about the buffalo hunt and all the things that happened on the prairie that created our culture. So I tried to bring these 3 movements together because they're all really important parts of the land and the tradition and my feel about Red River.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So, Ariel, we both grew up on the prairies. What does that prairie landscape mean to you now that you live in wonderful Montreal?
Well, I mean, you don't really get the same kind of wide open space. I mean, usually you see a mountain somewhere in the distance, and I mean, I do miss it. I had the same memories of traveling because Jillian and I, my sister, we mostly studied in Winnipeg for music in our teens. So we did the drive a lot as well, and obviously we had family in Winnipeg as well. But yeah, miss the wide views that you would get.
I definitely can identify with that.
Mm.
I'm from Alberta, but we won't hold that against me today. Maybe another time. Pat, I have to swing back to the fact that you met Leonard Bernstein. I didn't know that. I wouldn't have been able to speak in front of him. I think I would have just been too. I might have just like had no words. So tell me, what was it like to meet Lenny?
Oh, that Lenny, yeah, Lenny was character. We spent a summer in Tanglewood in the mid '80s, and Lenny was there quite a bit. I think he was there 3 of the 6 weeks, and I mean, he was an important person, but he was, particularly he liked to hide from the performers and hang out with the composers because we didn't have the same expectation. He was not going to make our career or whatever. He might have, but that wasn't really what he was doing at that stage of his life. So he just liked to hang around and listen to music, and then he would drag us to concerts. So it would be, you got to come and see the Kronos Quartet because they're doing this concert, and and we're going like, we saw 3 concerts already today, like we don't want to see any more concerts, we want to hang out, but it was really great. And like it was, I was writing, or I was in the process of working on a piano concerto at that time, and the Tanglewood Orchestra read one movement of it, and so we all had to play music for him. So I put on that recording, and he said, "Now that's American music." I said, "I'm from Canada." He said, "Oh, it's the same thing." I said, "No, it's not the same thing," but it's taken me a long time to kind of figure out exactly why it's not the same thing.
It's definitely not, and I think it has to do with the wide open spaces because
Well, also, I think we're a more multicultural country. We're not as homogenic. In America, you become American, and there are certain things that we all love about American culture, but we also include more different things. We're not as uniform.
I would definitely agree. Ariel, you grew up in a really musical household. I'm sure you heard music before you were born. And
Yeah.
how did it form you and your experiences by having your entire immediate family be super accomplished musicians and creative folks?
I mean, it was obviously very important and shaped a lot of my perspectives. I mean, when I was young, I would always be going to the programs that they would go to, and if I got too antsy, they would take me out into the hall, and I would run back and forth, until I was tired, and then I would be able to go back in without being disruptive. But I mean, uh, so many musical experiences. It really stays with you, and a lot of it contemporary music, like the New Music Festival in Winnipeg, and that was always a big event that I was excited for, even before I was really actively trying to be a musician, rather than just being a part of it, just because my family is a part of it.
So that's a great segue to something I wanted to chat about. Pat, you were in Winnipeg in the 90s with Bromwell Tovey, um, who we all remember as such an amazing musical figure. Um, and can you tell me what was it like at the beginning of the New Music Festival, and why do people go to Winnipeg in -40 to hear new music? Like, okay, Winnipeg in June, that sounds nice. Go by the river, have a picnic. But I gotta ask, like Winnipeg, January, how does it work so well? Because it's a brilliant festival.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'll tell you the some of the behind the scenes stuff. I think, you know, it was really a brilliant idea hatched between a guy named Max Tapper, who was the general manager of the orchestra at that time in Bramwell. And they picked January because in those days, the snowbirds from Winnipeg would go to Florida and Arizona, and they couldn't change their tickets because we're talking about the late 80s, right? And so the idea that you left for a couple of months to go someplace warm didn't hold much sway. You paid for your ticket, you wanted your ticket, you just didn't go to 3 or 4 concerts, right? So Max had sold, and he was estimating probably 30% of the audience was away in January. So he resold those tickets. He put new music on the program and resold the tickets. And so he could sell them for really cheap. And Bramwell talked about the ripped jeans set. So he would do funky stuff. And, you know, they really didn't know it would be successful. They were just taking a flyer. I remember where it really got me. I mean, in the first year, I think it was a Sunday night concert. So they did an opening concert with the symphony, and they did a CBC thing with David Yeager on Sunday night, and it was Christina Petrowska. And so they thought, well, we'll never sell any tickets. So we're going to put it on the stage and close the curtain to the hall and just put some bleachers up. And an hour before the show, there were so many people that they had to open the curtain, right? And they were just surprised. And I remember the second year on the Sunday night, it was my wife, Mary Jo, who was playing with Gwen Hobig, and they were doing the Lutoslawski Partita. And people went crazy. They had never heard this kind of music in Winnipeg before. And people started stomping on the bleachers and screaming and stuff because it's an incredibly virtuosic piece. And it was Gwen, you know, so Mary Jo and Gwen are out there going like, what just happened? And it was really the launch of this group of people. You know, it's cold, Christmas, you know, you're a month past Christmas, you're getting bored, you're in the house, and you go like, I better go to a concert. Why don't I go for a week? Why don't we have a great time while we're there? You know, and it was, you know, the programming that Glenn Buer and Bramwell were doing, the local musicians and the guests who were coming in, it was just a party, you know, and you know, we would stay afterwards and there would be, improvised music or jazz players. There would be food. Everybody's hanging around, and it was just a real community event that, launched the careers of so many different composers. When I think about particularly, I know years later, I was dean of music in Brandon in the early 90s. And because I was going every night, because I was one of the associated composers, I would just tell the students, like, okay, we're taking the van in, anybody want to go? And that's when Jocelyn Morlock talks about jumping in my van and all the students going with us to these concerts. And then I had to teach Monday, so we would come back and then go in and out almost every night. So it was just a great community experience.
And we are all missing Jocelyn's smile and her continued creativity and music. Her music's still with us. And Ariel, you're going to be playing a piece by our late friend Jocelyn. What's that piece called, and what does that mean to you to be playing that piece?
Yeah, it's called Halcyon, and it basically represents kind of calm and serenity, and it's incredibly beautiful. And I think it'll be hard not to be emotional in those moments. But I remember her growing up because she was a student in Brandon when I was young, and yeah, and then later on I was able to play her music a couple times. It was always fun seeing her again. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So Pat, I want to swing back to something you said earlier. You mentioned that when you were born in Winnipeg, you were part of the 60s scoop. And if it's okay with you, can I give our listeners a little bit of background on what that is? So for our listeners in Canada and abroad, in that era, the 1960s, many provincial and federal family agencies were basically purposely encouraging adoption or social services of Indigenous children. Pat, would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it was not, yeah. I mean, what can I say? I can tell you that the nuns took my mom away from her family. She was quite young, and they didn't really give her a choice. I mean, they said they told everybody she's a bad girl, she's going to go away. So she went to this place with all the other young Indigenous women who were bad girls, and their kids were taken away from them, and then they were sent back to their families. I mean, it was a really forcible, the idea was to take away as many Indigenous kids from their families as possible, and have them adopted, or as you say, put them into social service circumstances. So I joined the post-adoption registry just when we moved to Brandon, and so they gave me some of the what they call non-identifying information. That was in the early 90s, and the stuff in the file was so hateful and horrific that I just try not to think about it, because to have my birth mom spoken about that way is just is just awful. So I mean, I'm really lucky that I was able to reconnect with my family, and it was a dual thing between, DNA testing and the Manitoba government actually opening the birth records. So we were really fortunate that and Ariel was able to meet his grandma before she passed, and I was able to spend a few years with her. And I have a wonderful big Métis family. I've got 4 sisters and a brother who was also adopted out, and strangely enough, he ended up in Slovenia. So we've connected. He's hoping to come to Canada this summer, but I met him 2 years ago, I guess, in Madrid, Spain, of all places. But yeah, it's a dark part of our past. I mean, when I joined the the Red River Métis or Manitoba Métis Federation, and I would go to meetings in Brandon, and I mean, there are just so many Indigenous kids who are now finding their way home and back to community, and trying to figure out how we fit in.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that because these stories that you're sharing, like this is knowledge that you're keeping about the truth of Canada, and I think that this is just critical for all of us to reflect on. Ariel, for you, how has your Métis identity impacted your creativity, your music making, or other aspects of your life that you're comfortable sharing with the podcast audience here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was it was very interesting to learn about my dad's connection and therefore my connection with it. And I've had a lot of good opportunities since then to play Métis music. A couple of pieces by Ian Cusson that I've been able to play. One as part of a competition, and it really makes me want to continue to go towards Métis music. And I've always enjoyed playing my dad's music, and it's really great that there can be, I'm not just sharing my dad's music, I'm sharing that culture as well, our culture. So it really wraps together nicely with that.
Thanks for sharing that. I couldn't agree more, and it's a real honor for us and our friends at Le Centre Culturel Francophone de Vancouver to be sharing this opportunity to hear this music. Um, so, Ariel, a question. The cello is so popular, and no pun intended, but it really resonates with audiences. Why is the cello so popular?
Well, I mean, obviously I'm biased, but most of the time people talk about how the cello is the instrument that most closely reflects the range of the human voice. Like down to the low C is about the low range of most basses, and up to the higher end. And I think that's true, but I also think that there's a really special tone with the cello that it's so rich and warm. Um, Obviously, the other string instruments are beautiful, but I think there is something special about the tone that you can get from the cello, and I think that's one of the reasons why people love it so much.
And the repertoire isn't bad either.
That's true.
One thing that I think about every once in a while is the visual of it too, right? Because it's facing forward, we can see the player moving around the instrument more than you can the violin. The violin's it's a bit hidden and a lot smaller, so I think being able to see what's going on is really intriguing for people, and it really does, it aims right at you.
I think so too. And it's like being embraced. Whereas the violin, you're trying to push it away from you. It's too awkward. So we're gonna have our last few questions here for our wonderful guests. Pat, what does it mean to have written a chamber work for your son and to dedicate it to your son?
Yeah, no, I've been really thankful for that. So, particularly, thank you for this opportunity to do that. I mean, I think the first piece I wrote for Ariel, he was quite small. And then, when he was a student, I would end up being commissioned by some other cellist, and then he would play the piece. You know what I mean? So, I'm really thankful to have the opportunity to write something really intended for him to premiere. That. One of the great things about being a composer is that you get to write for people who you often know and love certain things about what they do. Like I wrote a solo cello piece for Shauna Rolston many years ago, and I'd known Shauna since she was a teenager. And for me, she has all these incredible things that she does, but I had always so admired her bowing technique. So I put a lot of that in there. So, with Ariel, there are certain nuances of melodic writing and his ability to cover the whole cello that I really wanted to explore. And so it was really fun for me to be able to do that. And in a multi-movement work where you can have something fast, something slow and lyrical, something dynamic and rhythmic, and have all those opportunities. So that was really fun.
That's amazing. And Ariel, likewise, like, what does this mean to you that this is a piece, a sonata, pretty major chamber work your dad's written for you, and you get to play it in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, I've always really loved my dad's music, and whenever possible, I've liked to play it, perform it, share it with others. And this is really the first time, other than when I was a little kid, where he wrote a little, little piece for me that I can really be part of that initial process of creation and sharing. So it's pretty exciting. I hope it's not the last.
I don't think so. And we would be remiss if we didn't thank the SOCAN Foundation for their generous support of Canadian composers across this complicated, beautiful country in which we live.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the BC Arts Council, who recently gave their generous support of this project as well. So am so thankful to have had both of you today for this podcast conversation. I think this has been one of my favorite chats. I think it's because we're all prairie people. And we've been
All
displaced
displaced prairie people.
Seriously displaced, yeah. But as the hockey playoffs are started, I've been a pretty firm Canucks fan for the last 15 years, so I'm feeling a bit more settled.
Good for you.
Yes, and we hope to see all of our audience on Thursday, May 9th at the Annex, which is between Robson and Seymour. And thank you so much to our guests again. And we hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Merci tout le monde.
Merci.
Thank you.